something really important that we need to talk about is sleep and the lack of it and that effect on our lives. There was actually a pretty awesome New York Times article that came out in April of 2021. I'm just kind of pulling it up here again. It was called Sleeping Too Little in Middle Age May Increase Dementia Risk, Study Finds. And the research that they did in this article was talking about around the age of 50 on, those who sleep 6 hours or less a night are more likely to develop dementia in their late 70s. And this article, when it came out, was actually a confirmation of what a lot of people in the medical field and psychiatric field already believed. I remember, I have a very personal connection to this because I struggle with insomnia. I actually was diagnosed as a child with pretty radical, intense ADHD, and as an adult, I still experience that. And part of the consequence of that is insomnia. It's really hard for my mind to wind down and fall asleep. But I also know when I started seeing my primary care physician at Cedars, she warned me that if I didn't deal with my insomnia and I didn't actually get a full night's sleep, she believed that it would eventually create dementia or cause dementia down the road in my life. And so she thought it was really important in my early 30s to tackle my issues with sleep. And I've had some phenomenal people help me figure out what I need in order to make it work for me. And everybody's different. Everybody has kind of their stuff. So for me, this is a deeply personal conversation, but I see so many of my friends, both young and old, that are struggling to get a full night's sleep. And I get concerned, especially those that are burning the candle at both ends because they're really trying to make it in this world. They're trying to build something. And there's almost this attitude I hear a lot too through podcasters and YouTube of like, you just got to get up early in the morning and go for it and just work hard and get 100 hours out of your day. And it has a consequence, and the consequence will come later. And I want to preserve my mind for as long as possible. And that's what's going to happen, is that if you cheat your body's recovery and rest that it needs to rebuild, and even for your mind to file away all the things that you've learned and all the observations you've taken in and all the thoughts and reflections, if you don't give your mind the proper time to truly recover through deep REM sleep, eventually the belief is your mind is going to deteriorate faster. Your memory is actually going to not perform as well in your later years. And I've actually had some pretty close friends that are brilliant people. As they're getting older, their memory is starting to slip. I can see it, and they're only in their 50s. And they're not recalling details. They can recall events. They're not recalling the precise details. And then I watch their sleep habits, and sometimes they're sleeping like 4 hours a night, 5 hours a night. And recently I really pressed in on an older friend of mine and just said, you've got to sleep. It's affecting your memory. So in this article, it actually confirmed what a number of my physicians and psychiatrists had talked about over a decade ago. They knew this was true. So what you hear a lot of times when it comes to some of the prescription medications, like maybe an Ambien that's only meant to be used short term, or there's other medications out there. Belsomra is something that Merck & Company actually developed. It's still in a brand name phase, so it's wildly expensive. I think it's like anywhere from $450 a month to $600 a month. There is no generic version of it. I've actually been using that one, and it's very effective. It hits a different part of your neuroreceptors. So a lot of they're called Z drugs. The Z drugs like Xanax, or I believe Ambien is also in the Z drug category, Sonata, Lunesta. The Z drugs hit a particular type of receptor in your brain, and the fear is that by hitting that, you're going to affect long-term memory. There's a different type of receptor that Belsomra hits, and by hitting that, you can hopefully take this long term, and then in your later years, you won't have consequences for that, like the Z drugs would give you a consequence. Plus, Z drugs become addictive, so that's where the concern from a lot of pharmacists and a number of doctors will talk about how Z drugs become addictive, and then once you build up the tolerance to it, like Xanax or like Ambien, it isn't as effective anymore, but then you can't sleep without it. So they don't want you to be on that stuff for long term. And I remember the conversation I had with my primary care physician, and she said, well, I don't know what the effects long term that taking Ambien will have on your mind. And maybe there is a risk there that down the road you develop some kind of a memory issue because you took Ambien long term. But she said, what I do know is that if you don't sleep for the next 20, 30 years of your life, she goes, I can pretty much predict what will happen to your long-term memory or your memory faculties as you get older. So at that point, I was like, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and really explore what it is to get a good night's sleep.